Play some music.
Okay, what we're going to do then, I don't have any cards, but I understood from Brett through Lynn that some people would like to speak, so we'll give you that opportunity. I'll just ask you to raise your hand and speak. But first we want to start the session off with Brett Birmingham and the City Center Performing Arts Center, and then we'll move on to the budget with Larry Lang, but the Performing Arts Center should be quite along. Okay, Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Kavanaugh, members of the council. We are here in front of you this evening due to a request from Civica Development to discuss the PAC RFP with the Mayor and Council. And prior to turning the time over to representatives from Civica Development, management has asked that I provide a brief update on the City Center PAC RFP. And the first thing I wanted to note...
Excuse me, could you just, for the public, tell them what a PAC is and an RFP? Just give the words to it.
Sure, I apologize. We're talking about the City Center Performing Arts Center, and it's such a long word that sometimes we just say PAC. And when we speak of the procurement, the RFP request for proposal. I apologize.
Thank you.
The first thing that I wanted to note is that staff has received a number of emails expressing support for a Performing Arts Center, and staff wanted to acknowledge that we do realize that a Performing Arts Center would be an extremely valuable asset to the community, and that staff is very much in support of having a Performing Arts Center in the city of Goodyear. I wanted to, the outline for this evening's topic, I wanted to quickly run through some background and talk a little bit about the PAC site, talk about some of the options that the city will be faced with in the near future, and then we will turn the time over to representatives from Civica, and there will be time for questions and answers. First, wanted to talk about some of the key dates. On March 26th of 2007, the council directed staff to pursue a Performing Arts Center, and this was during the time when we were talking about the City Center public-private partnership efforts, and the council wanted us to pursue that PAC associated with the City Center public-private partnership efforts. Then in July, the council provided staff with specific expectations on the City Center Northwest Master Plan. Then in October 9th, staff returned to the council with a master plan. And we have an exhibit of that later on in the slide presentation. On September 18th, we did release an RFQ, a request for qualifications, for a Performing Arts Center in the City Center area. And the city did receive one applicant, and that was Civica Development. Civica was successful at the RFQ stage, and the City of Goodyear released an RFP, a request for a proposal, on November 21st to Civica Development. And that RFP is still out. It is due back on April 30th. And so we have not received anything yet, and we look forward to that proposal being submitted. We now have an exhibit of the City Center Northwest Master Plan. You can see that the Performing Arts Center has been highlighted with a dotted red line. Zooming in now, these two graphics were taken from the RFP documents. You can see the City Center site, and then zooming in on the Performing Arts Center site. The RFP contained some parameters for the PAC, and we know that it's approximately a 5-acre site. It's important to note that this is located within the City Center Specific Area Plan. The Specific Area Plan requires a very unique type of urban development, as the council is aware. For example, things such as development adjacent to Estrella Parkway and Yuma Road is required to be at least 3 stories. Mixed-use development is required. A vertical mixture of uses is required. And it's also important to note at this time that due to the urban nature of this future city center area, In regards to parking, there will need to be shared parking throughout the city center site. Because it is in this city center specific area plan, the plan will not allow, large expanses of parking. We will need to make sure that the parking is shared and the various uses will share the parking throughout the city center site. And just 2 more slides for me. We have been advised by our legal and procurement officials and staff that if we do make any changes to the RFP documents, if staff or the council desires to make any changes that are significant, then we would have to start the process over. So we do need to be aware of that. Examples of significant changes would be, for example, if we were to change the requirements in the RFQ, or if we were to propose to relocate the PAC to an alternative location that was not included in the RFQ, we then would have to start the process over to make sure that it's fair for those who saw the original RFQ. And my final slide, just want to go over quickly the alternatives for the PAC RFP. There are essentially 5 choices that the city will be faced with. I mentioned before that the RFP is due on April 30th for the Performing Arts Center. The first alternative would be for staff to accept the proposal. The second alternative, if for some reason the proposal did not meet the city's needs or the city was unable to make this particular proposal work, the city may elect to decline the PAC proposal. Another option would be to negotiate with the city center developer for a PAC. That would be an option. A fourth option would be for the PAC to return to the outlying years of the CIP. And, of course, a fifth option would be no action at this time. So with that, I will ask Eddie to load Civica's presentation and turn the time over to representatives of Civica Development.
Bill and Charlotte, there's seats in the second row, each right up here. Charlotte right next to Julie. And Bill, there's one over here next to Cindy.
Okay.
Okay, applicant.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Bill Pennington. I'm with Civica Development. And do I really look that bad?
You're not on our screen.
I ask that question every week.
That's pretty scary, isn't it? Anyway, on behalf of Civica, I just want you to know that we're very excited about the PAC, Performing Arts Center. And we have been working through the request for proposal for some time. And the city staff has been very helpful. We've had a couple of meetings which prompted this meeting here because we have run into a couple of issues and we'd like to present them tonight, and hopefully we can work through them and work out an agreement that is acceptable to both parties. Anyway, Jim Chapman, most of you know him. He's Sunburst Productions. He's been working very, very hard on this meeting tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to him and let him explain to you what the issues are and what we propose to correct them. Thank you.
Thank you. And after Jim, as part of the applicant, speaks, then we'll open to the public.
Certainly. Mayor Kavanaugh and council members, thank you so much for this opportunity to visit with you regarding this, what we feel is a very important asset and something that can be the gem of this community. It's been a long process. We've been at this now since a year, as Brett mentioned. We're now down into the final throes where we believe it will result in a solid response to the RFP. As he mentioned also, we're the sole applicant on this project, and we do appreciate this opportunity that's been provided through this RFP process. As we've gone through the RFP requirements, there's some specific items that we've noted. This RFP requires us as the developer to design, fund, build, and operate the Performing Arts Center. As was mentioned, there is a site that's been identified. It is about 172,000 square feet. It's a little under an acre for the buildable, 4 acres, excuse me, for the buildable envelope, and it is an angled site. One thing that we saw in there that causes us concern, and we have mentioned this to staff, is the parking requirement. Not only are we to build the Performing Arts Center on this site, but we are also asked to park our patrons on this site on a 4-to-1 parking ratio. Now, we understand that there's an opportunity for shared parking potentially with the rest of the city center complex. But until those individuals are identified, we can't assume anything on that parking at this point. A 4-to-1 ratio on a center that we have discussed and many of you have seen in prior presentations in the past is over 1,000 cars. That's a huge parking requirement. Also imposed on this RFP are some detailed technical criteria that was given to us saying that the Performing Arts Center must provide this. It talks about specific lobby space, it talks about restrooms, it talks about a number of different criteria here that was very technical and detail-oriented. The challenge with that is that oftentimes that criteria is developed as you look at, first of all, the marketplace, then the programming that will be done in this complex, what type of programs will be presented here, because that will determine essentially what the space utilization within the complex is. That's a surprise to us because what we were expecting was to say, give us a proposal that makes sense, that can be operable, sustainable, and provide the right opportunities for the patrons of this community. But instead, what's happening is we're being dictated some of the elements that adversely affect our business model. And one of the greatest concerns where there's restrictions on communication. This is intended to be a public-private partnership, as has been detailed, and yet we're not allowed to talk to our potential partner, except through emails through the procurement officer. That's a cumbersome process and not conducive to creating a partnership on this basis. Let's look at the arts market here for a minute, because this is a very important key point. There are several models out there in the industry. You can look at Peoria, for example. Peoria chose to go with a small complex of about 20,000 square feet, 270 seats in their main theater, and their market radius is very, very small. That is certainly one model. The other end of the spectrum, we have Mesa Arts Complex and others as Scottsdale, Chandler, that have larger complexes. The new Tempe Center that has come online here in the past few months. Each one of those have a different model and a service radius, a primary market area. We look at this center from the standpoint of a regional arts center. There's something that's happening in this valley, and it's been evolving over the past several years. The valley in the arts market is beginning to regionalize itself. We have pockets. For example, the Mesa Center has a certain radius of operation. Scottsdale as well, Chandler as well, the downtown centers as well. But once you hit Central Avenue, there is very little on the west side. This provides an opportunity for us to create a regional anchor, an arts anchor in this community, in Goodyear. This regional market, this primary market area is 1.2 million people and 500,000 households. That's a huge potential market. To put that in comparison, the Mesa Arts Center, their PMA is under 500,000. So we are 2.5 times the size market for the Mesa Arts Complex. Also, there was a study completed through the West Valley Arts Council. They went on an extensive study and looked at the marketplace in this West Valley region, 10 communities constituting the West Valley. Their survey had a lot of data in it, and many of you have seen some of the results of that data. But there's one thing that was pointed out. There's a higher than average propensity for arts within this community, within this primary market area. That tells us that there is a strong market here. This, as well as other studies that we've done internally, substantiate that marketplace. We have engaged several experts, reputable, credible experts that are well recognized and respected within the arts community within the Phoenix metro area. Matt Lehrman and Frank Jacobson are supporting us on this market analysis, and they're in the throes of that right now, to look at our assumptions and either tell us their opinion of those assumptions or validate what we have already projected. So they're in the middle of that process right now. We feel that there's a very strong market and a desire within the community that will support a regional center in Goodyear. When you understand the marketplace, then you have to also ask yourself what type of programming is being requested by the marketplace. Are we going to have something, so for example, we used Peoria just a moment ago. The type of programming that's in Peoria is community theater. It's small traveling troops or community theater that's self-produced by TheaterWorks. That's one model. There are other centers that are just roadhouses where different entertainment is brought into that, and they become essentially a host for those programs, and that's the extent of their involvement. What we're looking at for this regional center is destination programming. Now, when I say that, this is the type of programming that will draw a large market radius. There may be 7 specific key programs that we present within this, that people will even come from outside the state to participate here because it's not offered anywhere else. That's the nature of destination programming, the likes of which is touring Broadway shows. Our market research has determined that many of the patrons, this is something they're looking for. They want to go out to the show. They want to go out and see the Broadway shows. What we're talking about is the touring shows. Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, Cats, that type of programming level within the complex. Also, they're looking for the national touring concerts, the Kenny Rogers type of concert programming that are on national tours at any given point in time. Now, bear in mind, this is not intended to compete with arena-level talent. That's a completely different marketplace than what we're seeing here. Arena talent may be the Madonna shows that go over in the Glendale centers. That's not what we're proposing for this center, but solid quality national touring shows. And we have formed alliances with Live Nation to assist us in that endeavor. Then we get down to regional shows and concerts. When we talk on that level, we're talking things like Phoenix Symphony. We also are strongly affiliated with the Juilliard School, and we'll have a Juilliard series within this to satisfy that classical need within the patrons that have expressed to us. We have some proprietary shows. This would be handled in the cabaret portion of the theater that I will show you here in a few moments. Those proprietary shows, we have the sole rights to Glenn Miller's name and image, so we do a lot of big band type of events. We do big band with singers and dancers and a very interactive, patriotic show. We can talk a little bit more about that, but that takes place in the cabaret where you have a dinner environment and a show. Then we also have local artists. We've reached out to many of the local artists in the area, as well as arts organizations, and want to provide opportunities and venues for these artists to display their talents, and have the opportunity for patrons in our community to see those talents and have that interaction, as well performing artists as well as visual arts. Any questions on programming? We want to keep this interactive, so if you have any questions at any point, just chime in. Feel free.
Don't bring Kenny Rogers.
What's that?
I said don't bring Kenny Rogers. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You can bring Aerosmith.
One thing that sets us apart from many organizations, we have a firm belief in inclusion. We reach out to everyone. We want to make sure that the needs of as many organizations, individuals, and the community at large can be addressed. We want to make sure that we can provide the right kind of things that meet the needs of the community. So as a result, we've gone to the West Valley Arts Council. We've gone to the other arts organizations and said, what are your needs? What type of facilities do you need? What type of programming do you envision for these complexes? And there are many, many arts organizations throughout the Metro Phoenix area that have nowhere to present their talents in this West Valley. This would be unique. It would set Goodyear apart from some of its neighbors. Early on in this process, when I was visiting with Steve in Cleveland, we were discussing some of the needs internally within the city, within city departments, for training facilities, for meeting space. And there was a discovery that some organizations were going off and renting hotel rooms, or not rooms, but hotel facilities, in order to hold meetings for the staff. So as a result of that, Mr. Cleveland invited all of the heads of the departments together. We had a brief presentation, and he asked each of them to assess what their utilization of this complex would be. How would they use it? When would they use it? To what extent would they use it? And that information was consolidated and provided to us to help us appreciate the needs within city, internally within the city, so we can address as much of that need as possible within this facility. And one of the more recent advents is the university. The university is coming here, Incarnate Word, St. Francis, and my mind just, Franklin Pierce, thank you. I am so sorry, Andrea. My mind just went blank. Forgive me. Franklin Pierce, and I'll show you why that's important here in a moment, too. As soon as I pull my foot out of my mouth. The universities, we've met with the universities and addressed and assessed what needs they have for this complex, and they're fairly extensive. There's a need for not only graduation exercises, but donor and patron meetings and so forth. And so we've looked at that need and tried to address as much of that as possible. Based on that market review, based on that needs assessment, here's what we've come up with. We're looking at a multi-use functional design, and these are the key elements of that complex. Concert hall of 2,100 seats, cabaret of 750, and you can see on down through the listing. But I want to address just for a moment on that concert hall. That is an important aspect because there's a lesson to be learned from other institutions within the Metro Phoenix area. Many halls have been produced using a model of 1,600 seats. There's a specific reason for that. Broadway shows will not write a contract in a venue under 1,600 seats. If they do, it is because they are receiving a specific monetary lump sum to compensate them for their losses to present in smaller venues. That's a key factor because something is happening in this marketplace as well. And it has to do with the product. It has to do with the presentations of Broadway shows specifically. The cost of touring these shows is escalating at a faster rate than the ticket prices are escalating. There's a delta there. That delta is growing. The only way they can compensate is to present those shows in larger and larger venues. More seats, they have a high opportunity for additional revenue, they can make it work. What we're seeing right now is there's already a move to have those contracts moving to 1,800 seats. That's now. You must bear in mind that the life expectancy of a complex like this is decades. It's 70 and 80 years in duration or longer. Properly maintained, there are performing arts centers that have been out there for decades and decades, still servicing the community. What will happen at some point is those contracts will elevate to even higher thresholds for contracts, for negotiations. So eventually it'll get to a point where you can't get the product in, and if you can't get the product in, people don't come to see a pretty building. They come for the programming. So we are pushing towards the upper end of the spectrum right now at 2,100 seats. That we feel that is a viable number for the foreseeable future within this primary market area. The cabaret is 750 seats. There's also ballroom facilities. Now, when we say ballroom, that's a large open expanse. You've seen what's happening up at the Wigwam and other facilities that are comparable. We're looking at something in that 700 to 800 seat range, but also that gives us the opportunity for 60 or 70 event booths to have trade shows or the like in this complex. And in a community theater for 400 seats. There's some concern expressed that even that 400 may be a little bit small, and there's a preference on many of the arts organizations to see that increase on that community theater just a little bit marginally, perhaps 450 or something on that order. Right now we're looking at 400, and we'll see if we can make the numbers work for something to accommodate that additional need. Community is where many of the arts programs that you've seen with the West Valley Arts Council that has been produced, or other Arizona Theater Group or the Black Theater Troupe or other organizations that would have programs that could come in here that would have audiences in 3 to 4, upwards of 450 patrons. We have the ability to have segregated banquet facilities for 380 in addition to the ballroom, so you can have concurrent operations there. This is a place where you can hold wedding ceremonies, for example, or wedding receptions. Black box theater. This is experimental theater. That's easy. The types of shows that are presented in there, Herberger Theater is a good example of this. They have daily black box shows in there. They have a lunch hour series. Thank you. And then we have the executive chamber as well, which I'll show you here in a moment. This is an original concept. It may or may not end up looking like this, but that's one exterior view of it. Looking at the complex itself, now some of you have seen this before in an earlier version, but there's some distinct advantages I want to show you and point out to this. In the lower left-hand corner of this complex, you'll see an extensive video recording space there. This is to be occupied by Franklin Pierce University. It is designed to emulate their Fitzwater Center. Many of you have seen that Fitzwater Center back east. They're trying to replicate that opportunity here. This gives us the opportunity also and potential for a PBS radio station in Goodyear. There's facilities there that could even go to a PBS television station should that materialize in the future. There's a second floor view of it. I'm not going to dwell on that because there's really something we need to get down here to, and that's the site itself. Brett showed you the site design that has been allocated for this purpose. There's a challenge. The center, as a regional center, does not fit on this site. As you see it superimposed on here, you'll find that on the left-hand side, the building parameters currently exceed the building envelope. It encroaches into the setback. Also, you'll see up there that it allows 87 parking stalls once that building is there. That's far less than 1,000. Even if you were to go to structured parking, you don't get 87 in that space. It reduces it closer to 60 or 65 because you have to allow for ramps and so forth. And you could go vertical at 60, roughly 60 stalls. It does not provide adequate parking for anywhere near this type of complex. That's a challenge for us because even if we said let's create some other parking further away from the complex, then we from an operational standpoint have a business challenge. Patrons don't like walking that far. If they can't get out near the facility or have an adequate drop-off within that facility, then they're less likely to come. That adversely impacts our marketability of the complex and the programs that are held there. I just want to point that out because what we have is 172,000 square feet, but this building footprint, as you see it, is roughly 120,000 square feet. That doesn't leave a lot of space.
Can I interrupt this?
Go ahead.
What was the square footage that the RFP requested? What was
There is nothing dictated in the RFP.
Nothing on that? Okay, thank you.
The RFP does, however, dictate internal design criteria to us. One of the elements is 12 square feet per person for the lobby at maximum facility loading. That forces us to create a 51,000 square foot lobby. If you look at this, and I know this small diagram is hard to depict, but that is larger than a football field. that is inconsistent with the marketplace and the comparable facilities. In addition, the restroom space that has been dictated to us would require us to put in excess of 220 stalls in this individual stalls within this complex. Now, we all want to see more stalls than less stalls, and we agree, and this is far beyond the code that's dictated up there. But the point is, we would like to see us to have the latitude to present a viable proposal from a construction standpoint, from an operational standpoint, and let that stand on its own merits, rather than having the internal criteria dictated to us that adversely affects our pro forma. As you can see, looking around that perimeter of that building, there is no parking. There's absolutely none available on that site. There is a viable alternative. It involves relocating the Performing Arts Center to the north 100 acres, placing it abutting the green space and the intended park on the west end. Doing open field parking, so that's the most economical. One of the problems we have with even structured parking is that structured parking is $15,000 per stall. If we have 1,000 cars, that's a $15 million parking structure. There is no way to recover the costs of that parking structure. And if you load that requirement onto the pro forma of the performing arts, this will never see the light of day. It can't happen.
What about underground parking?
Underground runs between $24,000 to $32,000 per stall. You just went to $24 million parking structure. Going down is more expensive than going up. And that's assuming that there's a physical place for this to be, short of having a 20-story parking structure. Even going to structured parking, there's an issue, and it has to do with discharge. We have event loadings within the complex. You'll have 2,000 people that go to their car at the same time. Now, I want to be number 999 on the top of a tall parking structure, because I'll tell you, that would be one of the few times I would go to the complex. No one wants to spend an hour trying to get out of a parking stall. Now, you can put additional ramps on, additional discharge, but all of that requires additional cost and space. The solution is to put it here. The reason being is it creates an opportunity for shared parking between the universities, the Performing Arts Center, the patrons that are going to the park itself, those that are coming to visit the park. There's been no discussion of parking for those going to utilize the park. In addition, those that are going to be in the upper left-hand corner, where we have, from what we have seen, is envisioned the multi-generation center and regional library. Where's the parking for those facilities? This places that parking field within close proximity of those two centers. It provides a synergistic way to approach parking. Synergistic way. Now, as I understand that space on that north 100 acres is destined for universities. And as those universities grow and they migrate westward with their construction and expansion projects, eventually it'll run into a point where it starts to butt up against that parking. The decision would need to be made then, do we go to structured parking at that point? But that may be many years downstream, and the city is at a different point in its maturation, and its business and tax base is different. Then it can be a municipal parking structure that services all need within this area, and wouldn't have to be put in right now. That's the addition. The other option that this provides up there is it gives the opportunity for additional expansion space. With the design that we have imposed on that original designated site, there's nowhere to provide for additional classrooms or administrative space should other organizations come to join with this complex, or if the universities chose to offer arts training within this complex and have something adjacent to it. That is not feasible on that other site. This would provide opportunity for that to materialize by going directly adjacent to the complex and tying in. Let's say the West Valley Arts Council, for example, chose to have some classrooms, which is not part of our pro forma or our intent, offering classroom art painting classes or pottery classes or any other types of arts-oriented training. allowing people or children to explore those opportunities. That is not part of our model. But if we're on that north site, there's an opportunity to create that at some point in the future.
Excuse me, how many acres then are you speaking of?
This total site, as you see it up there right now, is 8 acres.
8?
8.
Jim,
That's parking and the footprint of the building itself.
Okay.
Yes,
I
Georgia?
should have asked you earlier. You had listed executive chamber. Would you like to explain what you mean by executive chamber?
Executive chamber is basically a Senate chamber. It is used as part of the complex. If I back up here, I want to show you something very quickly. You see in the center of the complex, there's an area that has a U shape of seating that's directly below the ballroom.
This is about this one right here. Yeah, at the top of the APEC. The circle APEC.
Where's Eddie? What's that? Eddie, can you turn on Elmo, please? I guess that's the magic word.
It is.
Okay. Okay, if you look at that depiction right there, that's what we're discussing. It is essentially a Senate chamber. It is used for business presentations. It is used for individuals who are coming in giving lectures and seminars or training on wealth management, estate management, those kinds of touring type of elements that come in. It can also be used for business meetings. This becomes, quite frankly, a very strong marketing tool for us for the back portion of the complex. The back half of this complex really doesn't relate to performing arts. This is a hybrid facility. We consider this a true multi-use facility. The back of the complex is designed to service conferences and meeting space. Conferences in the 300 to 500 person range. We've looked at this, and that's a very underserved element of the marketplace. Everybody wants to go, the downtown convention centers and the large convention centers choose to cater to those that are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people in attendance. Well, those event planners that have conferences that are 200, 300, 400 people, they end up having to pay a premium to go into those facilities, and they don't get the type of service that they're looking for. The reason they have to pay a premium is because if they tie the facility up, they can't rent it if somebody comes on and says, gee, I got a 3,000 person conference. Sorry, we got this 200 person thing over here going on next week or at some point in the future. So what we're trying to do is look at this from the standpoint of from an underutilized segment of the marketplace and catering specifically to that. This can be regional in orientation. It could be national in orientation, having people come to Goodyear and increasing the tourism dollars within the community. But this specific complex is an anchor for that because it's something that is unique and they can't get elsewhere necessarily. You can go to a hotel and you can't get something like this. If we could return to this other presentation. Eddie, thank you. Now, there is a possibility with the next slide, you can see we could move it over and put the parking a little bit closer, but that also reduces the scope of the parking. That is one viable option. Brett mentioned earlier that there was a feeling that we would have to go out and rebid this whole process should we change locations. We have looked at that very closely, and we take respectfully, we disagree with that position. The original RFQ, which is here, and this is difficult to read, but the pages are pages 2 and 3 of the original RFQ. This is the qualification phase that was open to the whole public. Anyone who chose to could have weighed in on this particular phase of the process. It discusses distinctly on these pages in 2 specific points that this is a 140-acre site. Not a 40-acre site, a 140-acre site. From that standpoint, we firmly believe that the 140 acres was on the table from the very beginning and does not need to go out for any kind of rebidding. With that in mind, if they chose to propose against that, they could have, anyone else who wanted to weigh in could have proposed on that aspect of it as well, because it was on the table visibly within the RFQ phase. Now, there's some conflicting information within this RFP that concerns us a little bit. Part of the RFP reads as if the city chooses to buy, or essentially buy, a performing arts center. We want it built, and then the city will own this facility. That's the way it reads, because it talks about having management fees and things like that related to the Performing Arts Center. That is one completely divergent pathway for financing, because if it is going to be city-owned, then we get into bonding or other alternatives which we could discuss, like certificates of participation or something, other financing mechanisms like that. But essentially, it is a city facility. It would be funded by the city and owned by the city. That is one method. That is not what we would propose. We would prefer a public-private partnership that involves a city lease of existing facilities. And some of you, I've visited with that a little bit in the concept about that in the past. But essentially, as is said in other portions of it, the developer would build the facility, fund it, design, fund, build, and manage. And then the city would participate on a leased basis. So there's a financial contribution to the complex to make it viable. But it is far less than trying to do ownership and then carrying the burden of the operation and management of the facility. O&M on a facility like this at 140,000 square feet is significant, very significant.
And what is that figure and estimate the city would be involved in?
That will be part of our final proposal. I would prefer not to make that public at this point, but we would prefer to let staff deal with that and make recommendations to council as far as what those exact numbers are. But there needs to be a discussion of ownership, because those are divergent pathways for the proposal response. And it's not cost effective for us to try and say, well, gee, we'll do both. Well, that's fine, but these are hundreds of thousands of dollars to respond each one of those directions. That's not effective. We would prefer to have an open forum of communication where we can work together to create and formulate this public-private partnership and define the criteria together, and rather than having just arbitrarily dictated criteria to us, especially on internal operation that affects our performance from a business model. So the facility ownership is a very, very key element and needs to be decided before we submit on this proposal. Dictated design criteria, we've discussed that enough, and also the direct correlation between design criteria and city financial involvement. If you guys want a 51,000 square foot lobby, we'll build a 51,000 square foot lobby. But somebody's going to have to pay the bill. And that directly impacts the city contribution financially. We don't see a benefit to it. We would not recommend it. But if you want it, it can be done. We took these numbers and visited with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. We wanted to know what kind of economic impact this center would have on this community. They contacted us back and said, here's your impact. First year, $66 million worth of revenue within the community. That's their opinion, based on their model and their experience.
I'd like to know what that model is.
That is a standardized model that they use for projecting these things. They do the same thing for other communities that have arts facilities within the Metro Phoenix area.
What type of financial income is Mesa getting out of their performing arts?
Mesa is an interesting discussion. We could spend a lot of time on the Mesa complex.
Well, it's not flying.
They're right now they're in the red, and I'll tell you why they're in the red. That's that their facility was designed on a different model here than what we are proposing. They built their facility, and less than 50% of their facility generates revenue. Yet that portion that does generate revenue is having to carry the overhead burden and operation and staffing for the entire complex. I'll tell you, the individuals on this council probably know Dick Bowers. Dick is a good man. He was a city manager for Scottsdale for years, and he currently manages Herberger Theater. So he has an insight to the arts. I met with Dick and showed him exactly what we were trying to achieve here and the model that we had for this, financially as well as the design concept. And I asked his permission, so I'm quoting him with his permission. He said, "I have never seen an arts complex designed from the standpoint of profitability. There's always other motivations. Because of those other motivations, we see the kinds of costs in other centers. Mesa is a good example. If you were to build Mesa Arts Complex today, it would be $600 a square foot. That's the cost that they incurred, escalated for today's values. The Tempe Arts Center that was just completed was $700 a square foot. Those are large numbers when you're talking 150,000 square foot structure. But from our standpoint, we have value engineered this. We have invested the time, expertise into this complex to make sure that it is sustainable from an economic standpoint. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I'd be wasting my time.
How much input have you had, you individually have had in this project?
In this project,
Yeah.
Significant.
I know that, one of the council members has brought you on board years ago, okay, with the same concept of providing a performing arts center.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I said, one of our council members has brought you into this picture several years ago with the idea that you were going to build a performing arts center for us. Are you still in, what is your position now with Civica?
With Civica, I do not work for Civica. I own Sunburst Productions along with other investors.
Okay, so you're still,
We are an independent company.
and what is your relationship here with Civica then?
They are partners on this complex.
And you're a partner of theirs?
Yes, on this endeavor.
I guess I have a question, because we're talking about staff, about the RFP. The ones we sent out on the other part of the civic area for the city hall, for the library, for that, the process that we went through is the same process that Civica has gone through. So if we're allowing, and I'm not making a judgment call whether you should or shouldn't, but if we allow them to come into negotiation like this, more of a negotiation instead of a presentation, do we then have to allow these other companies that are doing the other part of the civic area? I'm not articulating myself well, but somehow I...
Well, I think, first of all, you got to realize there are two different procurements. You have the
Exactly.
procurement of the city center, which was following its path.
Right. But we set
We
down
would
the
be,
rules.
I will say, there's one submitter here. If there were multiple submitters, we probably definitely wouldn't be doing this.
Okay.
So, since there's one, a little more leeway, but my view, we shouldn't be negotiating in this meeting. They're presenting,
Yeah, okay.
and the question is, if we want to follow the path that they're presenting, then we need to ask ourselves the question, is that a significant change that requires us to resubmit or relet the RFP to make sure we have a competitive public process?
I just want to make sure we're not in conflict with the other one.
Okay, they're
and
separate processes.
how it was handled. So, thank you.
Please bear in mind, we're the only entity that has received this RFP.
We've got to
Exclusively.
roll a bit here.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll have some when we're finished, I know.
Okay.
I have just one thing to say, and I appreciate the fact that you're coming in with a hybrid, because I think that I don't know that the support anymore for standalone performing arts centers exists, and so I think that this is well thought out, and I'm giving you credit for that, because I really do believe that a hybrid is what's going to work. Now, let aside the rest of the finances, but I do agree with that part of your presentation, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
And the other thing I want to make known is that you talk about what this impact will bring, but when we attended the America for the Arts conference in Las Vegas this last year, and I happened to attend a seminar on performing arts because I'm interested in them, and they proceeded to tell me that most of them run in the red.
That is true.
He said, so if you're going to do this for your community, that we, as a community and as a council and a city government, must be fully aware that it's going to hit our pocketbooks. We're going to have to support this somewhere, sometime. So I just want to make that clear. That is a concern that I have. It's
That's
not,
the hybrid.
and so,
And we will let our response to the RFP indicate what those financial arrangements can be to make this successful. But bear in mind also that under a lease scenario, the city is not at risk on this complex. There's no financial commitment on a mortgage or bond to this complex on the part of the city.
That's what makes us so unique. It's a whole different concept.
Okay, Jim, let me see if
seen it.
the public would like to speak. Okay, first off, who wants to speak from the public? I saw Julie. Anyone else? Over here. Okay. 2 people, is that it? 4. Okay, well, if you would try to limit your comments to 3 minutes, and we'll start with Julie, and then we'll just stay in that row, and then we'll go back, okay? And then we'll roll over this side.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I really didn't intend to speak tonight. I was just planning on coming and observing, but I do want to just reinforce a couple points that Jim made and ask you for your consideration. This is a regional market. It's definitely a regional market. There's an opportunity here. There's currently no other city in the West Valley planning a facility like this in any way, shape, or form. So that's a real opportunity, and it also points out a critical need. We're constantly looking for venues to do performances in, and most of them are inadequate. When you go to a high school auditorium, for instance, they're usually very ill-equipped. Scheduling is a huge issue, and it's very difficult to market. So this would be a great opportunity for us in that way. Again, the blueprint that Jim referred to, the West Valley Cultural and Heritage Blueprint, points out the need for this type of thing. For a multi-use facility, as Councilmember Osborne pointed out, this really does fit the bill for what the national models are looking at right now. So it's very current, very timely. Jim did definitely due diligence in this process. I've worked with him for the past year on this and talked to a lot of people on his behalf, and also know that he has really done his homework in putting this project together, putting the process together, putting the elements of this project together. So I want to just point that out to you. Parking is definitely an issue. When nationally people do surveys about performing arts centers and performing arts experiences, some of the things that cause people to not attend parking or performing arts centers and performances are definitely parking. If you have a bad experience, you will not go back. Similarly with toilets and dining, and whether it's too cold or too hot, and et cetera. So those are all parts of the overall experience, not just the show itself. So parking is definitely something that you should be concerned about. I do encourage you to move the site. It will allow for growth. It will allow for Jim to put together this business model that is the best business model to make this be profitable. Otherwise, it would be something that the city would have to end up subsidizing, and I do believe that what he's put together makes sense. That said, the classrooms that he has included in this, as far as the conference facility, the conference rooms could potentially be classrooms for certain kinds of arts groups to come in and do things. So that is not a total non-starter there. And the other thing that is incredibly important here is that this Performing Arts Center would be an anchor to the city center. Any city that is looking at development and redevelopment looks for this type of facility to really look at further development in that area. Greenville, South Carolina, I think, is a perfect example of this. Their downtown was completely dead, and they built a performing arts center out of an old mill. There were a lot of decrepit buildings, prostitutes, drugs going on that whole main street. Hyatt came in on the other side with a major hotel, and now that was in 1990. now in 2008. This is an incredibly thriving arts community, galleries everywhere, people dining. I don't know if many of you have been to Westgate recently. Oh, my 3 minutes are up. Westgate recently, but on the weekends, that place is humming, and this could provide the synergy that we need for our new downtown city center. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Just as your average citizen, I would just like to express that when I originally moved to this area, I was very disappointed that we did not have programs here that I could provide for my children and for me as an outlet, as a performer. And I've been looking forward to this facility greatly. I know that Jim Chapman has put a lot of work into this, and I think it's amazing that it can sustain itself. I think it's important that you do look at the parking structure, and I'm just grateful that as a city council you're looking at this and that we can have a performance anchor here, because I really think that that is an important part of society. I think that we need to have this. I think that it needs to be in our community, and we need to have the ability to show our children, as a mother, the arts in an area that is safe and an environment that will help them grow. I think for our children that this arts center has great potential. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Could you give us your name and address, please?
Really? My name's Amanda. Oh. Why? You're teasing.
Pardon me?
What?
Yes, please.
Yes? Oh, for the record, my name is Amanda Wilkes. My address is 12717 West Desert Rose Road in Avondale, Arizona.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
For the record, I'm Jack Hampton. I live at 3767 North 167 Lane and 2nd Lane in Pebble Creek in Goodyear. I am also president of Art League West. And I would just like Jim to speak briefly to what the art gallery will allow us to do within this facility. Just a question.
Okay, thank you. Jim? Can you make it brief?
I will.
Thank you.
This complex will have roughly 21,000 square feet in its lobby. It's our intent to have that gallery space contained and integrated within the lobby space. It is also our intent to have the West Valley Arts Council curate or manage that space for the complex. And so the contact would be through the Arts Council in order to access and have displays in that complex.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I can say I won't be using the ballroom. I'm Donna Myers. I live in Litchfield Park, 320 on Core Drive North. Terribly disappointed that Litchfield Park dropped the ball on this. This is such a wonderful opportunity. And we've been in the area for about, approximately 30 years. And we came here, it felt like it was Litchfield blossoming and then Little Goodyear Avondale. And I've seen the process of Litchfield becoming so isolated that we're becoming dead. And on the other hand, I've seen Goodyear grab the ball and run. And all I can say is, go girl. I can't imagine a company coming in and saying, we'll build it, we'll operate it, we'll bite the bullet if it doesn't work, how about it? And that we can say anything but fantastic and get out of the way and find out what they need and see what we can do to provide it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment from this side of the room? Okay, this side of the room. Mr. Gelser?
Gary Gelser, Mayor and Council. I'd like to address this from a land use perspective. One of the things that you will all recall on the city center area plan, one of the key components was that this was a 10 to 20 to possibly 30-year development plan that is going to take place over the four corners and the extra 100 acres that we're talking about. If you look at the new site of the Performing Arts Center, you have an opportunity to jumpstart the university complex area, in addition, at the same time, simultaneously building a city hall that we obviously need because we're very crowded in this small chamber. But I think from a land use perspective and from a development perspective over a 10-year period, you're going to get more bang for your buck if you put the Performing Arts Center at the new proposed location, hoping that the developer continues the verticality that he originally proposed along Australia Parkway, so that we don't have a long flat structure, but something that is 2 or 3 stories high with striking architecture. I think it's going to serve the city very, very well and will be instrumental in accelerating the growth of both the universities and the other areas of the city center. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further comments from this side? Yes, sir.
My name is John Mullum. I live at 4510 Ventry Circle in Litchfield Park. I've been following the development of this Performing Arts Center for several years now. Disappointed also with the fact that Litchfield Park dropped the ball on it. You have a marvelous opportunity here. One of the things that I took a look at the RFQ and the RFP myself to take a personal interest in this, and I agree with Mr. Chapman that the RFQ definitely allows the 140-acre site for the complete proposal here, which they have suggested that we use. In addition to that, by using that alternative site, it frees up that corner location, which is originally proposed, for additional retail and office space, which will bring additional tax revenue to the city as well. Jim didn't mention it this time, but the facility also includes a complete catering and kitchen facility, which will be used for the support of all of the projects that go on within that complex. Also, I have talked with Jim at some length to find out what he's done research-wise, because I'm interested to see if his product is really going to be worthwhile. And I found that he has not only gone to Mesa, but to Chandler, to Tempe, out of state, out of city, to find out where these performing arts centers that are existing, how they work, how they operate, what's good and what's bad. And he's taken the best points from all of these and put them together in what you see here. Gotten rid of all the stuff that doesn't work, the 50,000 square foot lobby space, things like that that are not practical, and put together something here that is unique and fits all the markets. And I think you would be wise to take this into account and do it now. I think it's time to fish and quit cutting bait. We need to move on this thing. Yes, sir.
When are you going to move here?
This is a regional facility. It's a regional facility. I want to participate in this. I want to be here. I want to support it. Okay? Thank you.
I didn't see any other hands. However, we do have members of our arts. We have a superb arts commission. Would anyone from that commission like to speak? Brenda is the boss of the arts, the chairperson of the Arts Commission.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Brenda Bernardi, and I am the chair of the Goodyear Arts and Culture Commission. I live at 18172 West Buckhorn Drive. I think in Goodyear, Arizona. I think to speak for the credibility of the research that Jim has done and put together, some of the people that he has brought to the table, the stakeholders, Matt Lehrman, Dick Bowers, all of the people that he has gathered around from the arts community as well. He's done a great job of bringing all of us together. So I think that should give you some good confidence in what he's putting together. And I definitely think that you should take a look at how you can move this forward and move the project with his requests to move the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's run across the table here, and then after we've done that, I think probably open it up again to staff, take our comments, and there's been some, obviously, the staff and Mr. Chapman have different perspectives on certain things. We should be aware of those before we leave tonight.
If I could, I've neglected, Eddie, if we could have that presentation put up one more time. I neglected to flip that to the last summary sheet, and I just want to make sure that's on the record.
Okay. All right, thank you. Councilmember Holland?
Just a couple of questions, and really for Jim. In the original requirements that you received, you saw all of these restrictions that you now look at as restrictions. And I thought maybe the staff might want to respond on where those restrictions came from. That was my question. Thank you, Brenda. Anybody from the
Jim?
staff?
Jim,
Yeah,
or
Could you
HDR?
repeat the question?
sure. In the original RFQ that went out,
Yes.
there were some restrictions in there that are now, they're looked at as restrictions. At the time, they were just requirements. But where did those original restrictions come from?
Well, the original restriction, criteria, qualifications, et cetera, came out through the process that the consultants went through with the city, with stakeholders, et cetera, in putting together the package, and putting together the master plan and the separate recruitments for both the city center and the Performing Arts Center.
So it became more of kind of a wish list type things. We want a huge lobby. We want, these particular areas that.
Actually, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. It wasn't even to that level of detail. We left those types of issues somewhat open-ended to ensure the creativity from whatever development teams would come forward. I think one of the criteria was based on the master plan itself, which was used as a template where that had come to council. I think in Brett's presentation, he mentioned it was brought to you in October in a work session, and that did show the layout of the city center, the Performing Arts Center area, and the 100 acres above that. And we did set that location template as part of the RFQ as well. So that is, in addition to the fact that it was a 140-acre site overall, there was the master plan also used to guide the process and to guide whatever was submitted to the city for consideration.
Okay. I guess I'm just trying to see, it's almost like, we gave you this task to do, and we put some parameters on it, and you've really tried to live within those. Another concern that I had is along that same line. It had to do with the space that we wanted to provide to build the Performing Arts Center. And it just seems like with the criteria that came in, that I was very much undersized when the criteria came in, and I'm concerned because of some things that Brett said very early on about, what is this going to, if we make a lot of changes, oh my gosh, we've got to start this process over again, and how much time and money that it will cost us. So to me, that's very important how we got to that point, so we don't repeat those issues.
Understood. And to answer your concerns, we didn't tailor the master plan to fit any particular Performing Arts Center template. Instead, that 5 acres and how it's laid out really is what fit in with the overall master plan of the city center. And the task of whichever development teams were selected to propose was to develop a PAC concept that fit within the 5 acres. At least that was the concept originally. We really couldn't develop the process or the recruitment around any particular vision. We wanted to leave it very open-ended, as I said, to ensure the creativity, but we also had to make sure that it meshed with the rest of the city center, and that was the whole master planning, where we did bring it to you, and though it was in a work session, we got general acknowledgement that what you were shown seemed to fit with the ideas you had of what the city center would eventually look like.
Correct. We thought you were on the right track, and so we told you to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. All right. I just kind of wanted to catch up. I knew there was some background there that maybe we need a little help in our memory bank here. And so I appreciate that, and good answers, and I understand where it came from now.
And one more point I wanted to make, Brett reminded me that in the RFP itself, it did contain some industry standards that were included in there as far as square feet per seat and things of that nature. So though there may be a disagreement as to the applicability of those standards, it wasn't something that was just made up or that came out of thin air. We did utilize, or HDR did utilize, applicable industry standards for the RFP.
We would not have accused you of that, by the way.
Understood. I just want to make sure
Not
you
a
knew there
problem.
was.
But when we were talking about the toilet spaces, for most of us, there's never enough. But, we know we have to be reasonable too. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
So wait, so quickly, what the RFP or RFQ stated was that it was supposed to be 5 acres, but what they have come up with is that for a sustainable performing arts center, it needs to be 8 acres. Is that where there's a little bit of conflict here?
I think that's a fair assessment, yes. And the part of, I think, what will help demonstrate their point is in the RFP process, there is a market study required. Mr. Chapman did refer to that in his discussion, and that will help demonstrate the draw, the size of the market, and what elements within a PAC would be necessary to make it sustainable, successful, and viable for the long term.
Now, if we, may I ask this because he's answered, if we move the site to the site they're requesting, what does this do to the other RFPs that were sent out? As to how they were going to place the buildings on?
Very good question, and my gut reaction is that it wouldn't have any significant impact on the city center site because we wouldn't be affecting the 35 acres that city center is intended to be developed on. If we needed to expand into that acreage, it would have a definite impact on the city center. Certainly, I would need to confirm this, but we would look at what options we had with that remaining 5 acres, whether it would be incorporated into the 40-acre site or some other process, or whatever we as a city decide we want to do with it.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Okay, good. Councilmember Osborne, anything further?
No, not right now.
Councilmember Lord?
No, I have a question. Are we going to agree to move the site, or what is our purpose tonight?
Yeah, we aren't going to be able to do that, but we are going to be able to leave them with some guidance on how these two
That's what
parties
I'm
have to
saying,
get together
but
to resolve this.
I guess that's because we certainly want it sustainable, and I do agree with them that corner is a very valuable corner, commercial corner that could be used a better use than the performing arts. It could bring in some significant tax dollars on that corner. So I think it's something to consider. And I appreciate your due diligence. I met with you, and I was dubious, as you know, a long time ago. And so it's getting better. But I think we need to make sure that staff and they can work out a congenial agreement on this. And I'm anxious to see the figures, we have to answer to all that, so I guess that's the next step. I don't know what he's doing back there.
What's Frank doing?
He can sit here. He's not acting.
I thought he had to leave the room.
I don't think so.
No, he does not have to leave. Under state law, there's no requirement that you leave the room. It just says you'll refrain from participating in the meeting. The council has adopted rules of procedure that also states that in addition to the state law requirement that you don't participate in the conversation, you have to remove yourself from the dais. But this is allowed.
Very good. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Go reflection, are you, Frank?
Yeah.
I do have a question to both of you. Can we talk? No. And this is from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. If we get into a relationship between the city and the entity that we're talking about here, we're certainly going to want some fiscal responsibility figures from both entities. You say there's a partnership here. Where does that partnership exist? And what type of financial responsibility does each entity have within the partnership?
Mayor Kavanaugh and council members, the way we have discussed this and the way we intend to formulate this within our proposal is basically complying with the RFP for the design, funding, construction and operation of the facility. That becomes the developer's responsibility and the operational team. However, it is well known that performing arts centers are not moneymakers. We'd be better off going down the road and building strip malls and doing this. It's more profitable. Our motivation in this is different. We want to see what happens in Goodyear, good for Goodyear. And this is definitely good for Goodyear in a lot of respects. But the dividing line is really in the form of a lease. And that is a lease of the city land to us for an extended period of time to allow the construction of the facility. And then a secondary term within that lease that offers space and utilization of that complex for city purposes for a given and defined amount of money. That's not subject to change. That's something that locks in and runs for the course of for quite some time.
Yeah. What I'd like you to do is to send back to the council your responsibility and the responsibility that Civica has in this project. Okay?
We will do so, but it'll probably be in response to the RFP. Is that satisfactory?
Well, I still don't know what part you're playing in this, Jim.
Oh, Sunburst Productions is our team. You probably haven't seen the qualification phase of this project. The qualification phase of this project required us to submit the team members that would be involved in the project. Civica is the developer, Sunburst Productions, and myself as the operator and long-term management of the complex.
And now, as an operator, are you going to have a financial responsibility?
Yes, we are responsible for all the O&M on the complex.
And that's the reason I want to make sure that you give us financials. Okay. All right? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Let me continue on that, and then I have a couple questions. Who design, build, manage, and operate? Who's going to pay to build it?
Under the premise of the RFP, we are responsible for funding the complex.
Okay, so the RFP permits you to do exactly as you would wish. Design it, build it, operate it. The RFP.
That is correct.
I wasn't sure of that. Okay.
But it goes back, as I mentioned earlier, to the ownership issue, because if it's the desire for the city to dictate what the interior operation of that complex or design is, and including some of the things that we've discussed, then must be a desire to own the complex, and that's a completely divergent pathway on financing. That's why we're bringing this to the forefront now.
And we'll try to help you through that. Regarding the fact that normally you lose money, our baseball teams lose money too.
So we'd have two entities losing money.
We'd be losing a lot of money around here. But the fact is, what you do is you make money in the ancillary stuff. The hotels, the restaurants, the condominiums, and those sorts of things.
That's where this economic impact comes in.
What about, we had 30 acres for each school, 60 acres, and 40 acres for our passive park, or however we decide to be. Are you talking about taking part of that 40, or are you talking about taking some of the 40 and some of the 30s? Because the schools are going to use this. In fact, it's crucial in their operations.
I understand. If you look at this particular proposed or suggested design, you'll see that the Performing Arts Center is split somewhat and encroaches a little bit on that 40 acres park site. Not by much. It's to the tune of an acre and a half to 2 acres.
I don't understand. Okay, tell me, what you have this circle thing here, right? Of course, it doesn't help you to point at my chart. You have two circles, right? The one on the west.
Okay.
Okay. Then you have that rectangle.
Yes.
Is that part of the 40, or is that part of the 60?
If you look up at the screen here, if I could direct your attention.
Just answer the question. I don't need to look at it. Just tell me where it is.
The answer is that the Performing Arts Center will be encroach about 2 acres on the park and about 6 acres on the university sites.
Okay, well, all right. Thank
So
you.
it's a split in there. And those are approximate. Please don't hold me to that.
And I'm not saying the
Approximate.
schools agree to that. I'm just saying that's, okay. But certainly the schools are going to use it. In fact, it's
Yes,
absolutely
that-
essential.
It provides an opportunity for parking for their purposes as well as an interim step.
Well, I would hope they would have a conversation in this decision, I mean, before it even comes back to us, staff, but. This is something that we have. Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, we're a long way from making a decision.
Yeah, we're not anymore.
You know, one thing I just learned from listening to this is that the city center design drove the Performing Arts Center design. And probably it should have been reverse.
That would have been very helpful.
And not just the PAC, but other things like City Hall. That should have driven, I think, the city center. It may be too late to do that, but I think that was a problem. And then I'm really gung-ho for this, to be quite candid about it. I'd like the city and you to come together in something that makes sense with you owning and operating it and building it. And one of the reasons for that is I think we're going to be hurting for money for several years. And we want to do things with our money. We want to build a baseball stadium. We want to have 2 teams. We want to have a city hall. We want to have a library, other things. And if we could have this particular requirement, which is every bit as important as everything I just mentioned, that requirement subsumed by someone other than us, I think it's to our advantage. And it just makes sense for us to move in that direction. This should be a signature element in the city of Goodyear, in my mind. And now's the time to do that. But we can't make a decision tonight, but can we, did our comments and questions and that, did that help the staff?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yes, we, a couple of things we'll be looking at, just to let you know, is we do want to look at have legal weigh in on the RFP to see if, in fact, there is a change to the 100 acres as opposed to the 40 acres. It's a little unclear as far as staff here on, we'll look at the legal ability to do that, number one, but number two is I know you can't vote on it, but is there an interest in the part of us looking at moving this off the 40 acres?
I think there is.
I think there is, but I think the partnership, the universities should be in on this. I mean, we have already talked to the universities about the acreage and what they could do, and so yes and no.
It should come back to us with the pros and cons of the options.
And so we need to have them all around a round table and have a free discussion on this, and certainly I know the universities would like to have the performing arts. It certainly is going to be an advantage for them. But then they may not want to share the space or give up the space. So I think it needs some cooperation and discussion needs to happen.
Maybe we could let them use some of the 5 acres that you're vacating. Who knows? But there's ways to work through this, I think.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we will be looking at, again, the opportunity for potentially moving this as an alternative. I also want to make sure it's understood that while the 5 acres was the constraint for this location, within that 5 acres there was flexibility as far as what can happen within that 5 acres, and we always wanted to make sure that that was understood. So do you want to leave you with that, Mr. Chapman? I think you are well aware through many of our discussions.
And let me just say this also. From a development standpoint, I think our partnership team, including Civica, would have strong interest in developing that 5 acres as commercial and increasing the tax base, as has been mentioned.
I think there's been RFPs already sent out on the rest of the acreage, if I'm correct, and assuming on the rest of it. So I think at this point it's too late unless they disregard all contracts, all proposals that are coming in.
Well, what we're talking about, excuse me.
But I think legally that we can't address that at all. Am I right, Mr. Lawyer?
That'd be my best guess. We probably have to do it either add on to the other RFP, you may know, or you have to do a new RFP. You just can't
one or the other. We just can't.
That may be an opportunity in the future.
Okay. Good meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have budget now, is that correct?
Yes.
Work session?
Yes.
And then we'll have our council meeting, and that doesn't look like it's a long agenda, so we'll do budget real quick. Larry, are you still here? There you go.
Larry, are you awake?
Right after the budget?
Yes.
As far as
Just walk to the restroom, but I'll wait.
I'll be brief for that.
Larry, if you can talk, let's go. Frank's right here.
Let them know I need Elmo back there.
Ready to go, guys. I know.
Oh, after this, yeah.
Don't look at me. All I did was put a piece of paper on it.
Well, I forgot until I saw you.
Okay.
We love it. I just wish I could sell the old ones. You want to buy another one? You need to park those BMWs, so let me know if Mercedes somewhere else.
Hi, Glow. Thanks for coming. Oh, good. But we didn't get to the historical
Here's someone's water.
not. I'm sure he did.
How are you? If you start, they'll quiet.
Particular item, and so I will start my comments. Can you guys hear me okay on the council?
Yeah, we cannot hear.
He just turned the mic.
First violinist in the first violin section of this.
Mic on now, please. Where the mic?
He lives up here. Yeah, he lives in Australia.
Just say in the mic that you're ready to start.
Okay, if we can get started now, someone wouldn't mind closing the door so that the crowd outside can keep moving. I'll keep my comments brief tonight, but this is the next installment on the weekly updates we're giving you on the budget process and where we are in the budget process. And tonight, the discussion is on the capital improvements plan. The area that we're focusing on in the capital improvements plan tonight is the revenue sources going into the capital improvement plan. We're not going to spend time talking about the specific projects of the capital improvement plan. The CIP committee is working on the reallocation of resources, but I wanted to update you on where it is, and that's part of what we talked about in the process. So as I go through this, we're going to be talking about funds that we expect to be available over the next 5 years in this process. The sheet in front of you, and each of you have just received a copy of it, shows the 2007 revenue estimates that were included in the capital improvement planning process. The sources from the general fund for 2007, 2008 were approximately $36 million, and they dropped down significantly as the years moved forward. Those numbers were relatively high because of an assumption of cash balances moving forward from one year to the next. The next category that we had in there was general obligation bonds, and you can see as you go across
we had numbers that were averaging approximately $30 million a year. I'll come back to this as I get to the numbers as to how those changes are calculated. And the final were the calculations for the development impact fees over this 5-year period of time, giving you a total estimate of revenues for the fiscal year 2007-2008 of $84.8 million, and originally in 2008-2009 of $69.8 million, and moving forward through the other 3 years. Our revised estimates I've referred to here as the 2008 estimates take into account a number of things that we've been talking about. One is the reduced revenues that we are seeing this year and the revised calculations going forward from our sales tax returns. As these numbers, this number has declined from the general fund by about $3 million from the previous years. That is an estimate of the portion of the sales tax revenues that were allocated to the capital improvement plan, and then the reduction in that revenue base as a result of that. The one reason this number is so large for fiscal year 2007-2008 compared to 2008-2009 is that we've historically had a fairly large cash surplus that we've been able to roll into the capital improvement plan. As you know from our past discussions, we've been worried about dipping into the reserve fund. I am not anticipating a large cash surplus at the end of this year due to the decline in revenues. The next item that I have in there is the general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds are funded or are used to fund capital projects, and we sell the bonds up front, and then we promise to pay them back over a period from 15 to 20 years. And those are paid back based on property taxes to the various property owners within Goodyear over that period of time, that 15 or 20 years. That provides excellent leverage where you're getting the bigger bang for the buck, you're getting it up front, and you're allowed to do the larger projects. I want to show you from the second page of your handout some changes in the assessed valuation assumptions that have happened from the prior years. I need to slide this way just a little bit. Excuse me, I'm going to zoom this out just slightly so we can get the whole thing on one page here for. There we go. For 2006, our primary assessed valuation was about $448 million, and the same year it was $495 million for secondary assessed valuation. The GO bonds are paid for out of the proceeds from the secondary assessed valuation. That year, that represented these first two columns. I didn't label it here, but this column and this column, the first two columns represent the changes in the primary assessed valuation, and those are calculations we receive from Maricopa County on an annual basis, and those provide limitations for our primary assessed valuation. And as you can see in 2006, from appreciation, the primary assessed valuation increased by 5.6%. New property that year, it increased by 18.4%. If you go on to these next two columns, that shows the growth for the same years in secondary assessed valuation. And in 2006, the secondary assessed valuation grew by 9.5%, and new property increased by 17%. As we go to 2007, and by the way, the 2007 assessed valuation is the assessed valuation that we are using for 2007-2008 fiscal year. And we had another considerable growth in our assessed valuation. The primary assessed valuation, because it's limited by formula as to how rapidly it can grow, was 10.7% last year. Whereas on the new property, added was 16.5% of the primary assessed valuation. However, on the secondary assessed valuation, we had a rapid growth in our assessed valuation, meaning the values of property shot up tremendously on all of our tax bills. And that was 39.5% for that year, whereas for new property, it was 14.9%. Going forward for 2008-2009, you can see that the primary assessed valuation is growing at a more rapid rate than it has for the past 2 years. And that's because of the complexities of the formula that amortize large growth over a longer period of time so that a property taxpayer is not hit with a huge spike in primary assessed valuation in 1 year. The secondary assessed valuation grew again significantly on value on the property, 18.2%, but the growth, because the numbers are getting larger, the growth in new property declined by increased by 12.8%, but the growth rate, as you can see, each of these 3 years is declining. So we go to 2009, and that is the fiscal year that will start July 1 of 2009. But the property values we have just received, saw an article about 3 weeks ago in the paper, that in Goodyear, the existing valuation for 2009 was declining by about 20% at that point in time. That's a decrease in the assessed valuation. Just using for argument, following this trend, and I'm just doing this for illustrative purposes here, if the new growth increased by 10% at the same time, that would still result in an overall decrease in assessed valuation of 10%, which would take this number down from $1 billion down to $900 million. That reduces, when we keep our property tax rate the same, which is our policy, that reduces the amount available for debt service by that amount of money. And so as we are planning the debt service and the bond issues, we have to allow for the fact that the assessed valuation is declining, can be expected to decline in 2009, 2010. And so issuing bonds in 2008, 2009 is not going to make sense because we will not have the mechanism to pay them back in 2009, 2010. As we're doing that, we're believing that there's going to be probably another year to catch up for that 20% property value decline, at least another year. We can speculate on if it goes further than that. But we held this to at least one more year where we will not recover that amount, and so that shows 2 years where there won't be an issuance of GO bonds to fund new projects, which takes us out to very small amounts for 2010, 2011, and 2011, 2012. The development impact fees, in this calculation, we've revised those down due to lower permits and also because of the litigation that we are in. We've set aside the monies to the pre-rates that we had before the most recent impact fee study. So the impact that the CIP committee is working on and intends to have a presentation for you, or intends to have more specifics for you of how they will implement this, is at the council advance on March 31st. But the total impact is that in the current year, this is a reduction in the capital improvement plan funding by about 8%, which is consistent with what we talked about. And this $6.3 million is part of the same $12 million that we talked about a couple meetings ago. The impact for the next 4 years is obviously more drastic because of these changes in assumptions. And what happens is, because of leverage, the numbers get very large to begin with. As you're adding them in, well, they get large when they come out also. And that's where a lot of those numbers are changing. There's also one policy change that part of this that we will discuss on March 31st, And that is, a year ago, as we were putting the operating budget together, we talked to the city council about, and you approved a concept of moving from the amounts we collect in primary property tax, moving a similar amount over to pay debt on secondary property tax not on secondary tax, excuse me, to pay more debt on GO bonds to get more projects done. And that was phased in a 5-year period with 20% of it included in last year's budget. In these calculations, we have left that out. But that is something for city council discussion from a policy standpoint. Do we want to leave that in, which will reduce the money available for operations, but allow that opportunity for you to look at it from this perspective? With that, that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Questions? Councilmember Osborne?
The 31 million on the 0708 general obligation bonds, are those left open right now, or are those already being used in some kind of form?
Those were committed in the capital improvement plan that the city council has approved, and many of the projects that have already either started, possibly even completed. That money, or that bond issue, we will be bringing back to the city council for closing sometime May or June at the latest.
Councilmember Souza?
Larry, there's no depletion in the rainy day fund, the 20 million?
As we talked about last week, I am still optimistic that we can get through the rest of this fiscal year without touching the $20 million. That is correct.
You indicated there was potential for usage in the coming year, and 209, 210.
I didn't intend to communicate that, and if I did, I apologize. Now, the city council could discuss that issue, but I honestly did not intend to communicate that tonight.
Okay.
Vice Mayor?
I'm good. I'm fine. Just listening.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
So, our next meeting is our regular council meeting. How about if we start at 6:50 up there? Is that all right?
650?
6:50. And, I'm sorry, and then this meeting is adjourned.